This is the, what is the formal title? Managing the Brand, the Secret to IP Longevity panel. So we have 4 great panelists from 4 companies I've worked with. I spent like 2 minutes making this very extensive, beautifully designed example of some of the IPs these guys have worked with, just to impress everyone in the audience. But I'm sure that won't be even needed. So we're going to talk about and focus on really, you've signed the deal with the IP license, which is obviously very much a focus in the space right now. How do you maximize that opportunity? What are some best practices to working with IP holder? I think first, love to do quick introductions. So starting, Vincent.
Hey guys, I'm Vincent. I'm a creative director at Behavior. We're a studio that has been around for the past 25 years, working on just about every console. Lately, we've been focusing on mobile and PC. Our focus has always been to work on IP games. We've also done some original IP, but IP is always our big business.
I'm Henry Lowenfels, VP of Business Development at Scopely. We're a Los Angeles-based game publisher. We have several large IP games in the market right now, Wheel of Fortune, Yahtzee, as well as The Walking Dead Road Survival, and several more on the way. So we're big believers in the power of IP and pairing them with great developer talent to make amazing games.
Hi, everyone. Hank Howey. I'm the COO. And probably more importantly for this discussion, the Vice President of Business Development for Disruptor Beam. We're a Boston-based game company, and I use that word company intentionally, but we can talk about that later. We're focused on working with the leading brands in the world and turning them into the leading entertainment properties and turning them into great mobile games. And we do that by basically focusing on story, focus on social interaction, and we focus on really pushing the bounds of great graphics on mobile devices. And the properties we work with are, our first game was Game of Thrones, Ascent, obviously based on that HBO property. We launched Star Trek Timelines this past January. The brand speaks for itself. And we just announced The Walking Dead. And we'll be talking more about that one as the year progresses.
Hi, I'm Jamie Ottley, and I run a studio called Galaxy Pest Control. It's based in Malibu, California. I founded it in 2010 specifically to focus on the opportunities in mobile free-to-play and now some PC work. We do a mix of original IP and licensed IP. We're currently working with a couple film brands. We also like to take classic licenses that haven't necessarily seen a lot of play over the last few years and bring them back to life. We did Q*bert a few years ago. We brought Power Rangers back for Saban, and we're currently working on a couple classic TV IPs.
Awesome. So I think the first part, we kind of wanted to focus on the development of the actual game experience. So obviously, with a lot of the IPs like Game of Thrones or some of these movie IPs, you have, these are IPs that exist in another medium. They are released on a certain schedule. If it's a TV show, a new season, or a movie with a release date. Would love to kind of get you guys insights and best practices around working around these kind of time constraints. If you're building a game that didn't have an IP, but you're building the same type of game that does have the IP, how much more time should you budget based on all the approvals? What kind of stuff and learnings can you guys share around this area? Anyone want to? Hank, you want to jump in?
Yeah, 2 quick things. One is, I don't know about you guys, but we don't experience that there's any significant extension of the lead time for the development of the game based on working with an IP. And once you hit your stride and kind of figure out how to work with IPs and how to work with the IP owners, that process really kind of takes care of itself. And so we haven't really noticed any particular elongation. And then the other thing I'd speak to is that in terms of hitting a date, we don't really, hitting a date or hitting a particular launch either of a movie or a TV series It's nice, but it's secondary to what we do. It's really, I mean, when you think about it, we're building games that are going to be in the marketplace for 3 to 5 years for a particular property, and so hitting a particular date, while it can be nice at times in terms of marketing awareness and launch, it's really secondary to creating the right game and a great game so that it can live that 3 to 5 year time period.
I totally agree. I think the number one rule to working with licensors is get things right at the outset. If you spend a lot of time with your partners really establishing the look and feel, getting the art guidelines right, understanding what they feel strongly about in the IP and where they have some flexibility, when you get down the road, even in live operation, the decision-making time is next to instantaneous. So I actually experienced the same thing as Hank and Disruptor Beam with our games, that games don't happen overnight, but doesn't get significantly elongated by any kind of IP. And then to Hank's second point, I have to concur as well. We tend to try to stay away from brands that are inherently tied to a specific date. There's obviously advantages to launching day and date with a new original IP movie, for example, like Pacific Rim. If you had that IP before and you launched with the movie, that's amazing if you can make it happen. But it's also a really scary place to be, because let's say you miss that and the movie doesn't become an evergreen property that people care about and there's sequels and you never know. You're just in a really tough spot because you're putting out a movie several months after the release of something that people don't really care about anymore. So we've tried to stay away from that, generally speaking. Sometimes, and there's some things we haven't announced that are a little bit more date-driven, but if you're going to go there, I mean, we try to give ourselves significant lead time beyond what we might otherwise expect for a normal game in that category.
Other thoughts?
I think a lot of the reason that you don't see a hit development-wise is that you're getting a lot from the IP. You have a universe that's made. There's a story, there's a background, there's an art style. That's all stuff that you would normally spend a lot of time iterating on pre-production. I would agree with Henry that you have to nail down approvals up front. Pick the hardest approval you have and do that first and get it out of the way and use that as the benchmark for the rest of it. And then we did a day and date product last year with Hotel Transylvania 2, and I can say firsthand that in mobile free-to-play it's challenging because we all run country tests and betas to get our numbers right in terms of retention and monetization, and when you're doing that against a hard deadline, there will come a point in time where either you ship something that you know isn't optimized as well as it should be, or you miss the marketing window, and there's a price to pay for that. Usually you do a lot of downloads and you don't see a lot of return on your investment.
Cool. What about creative constraints and working with the IPs? I mean, is this, by assumption, is this something you guys are fleshing out during the negotiation process? Obviously with some IPs, maybe you can't do violence or you can't do like certain types of things that they have. How have you guys found to work around these sort of areas?
Well, I think working with creative constraints around an IP is actually an advantage because if you're working on your own brand, you kind of have to set your own boundaries, and you could easily get carried away and go in all sorts of directions. And working with IP that already have rules in place that you must respect actually allows you to focus your creative focus and provide a better game.
There's also things you can play with a little bit. I mean, I'll give you two examples from our portfolio where I think it's really important to respect the brand, the feeling that people get from that experience. So Yahtzee, for example, our main monetization driver is bonus rolls. Well, obviously there are no bonus rolls in typical Yahtzee when you're playing, with real dice sitting across from someone, but it's something that tends to work on mobile, and if you structure it properly, it still kind of fits within the brand. Walking Dead, another example of ours. I mean, we made a character-based role-playing game, a free-to-play character-based role-playing game. The last thing you want to do to your players after they've grinded for days or spent hundreds of dollars to get a character they really want to say, oh, your character's dead. So obviously characters die in The Walking Dead, and it's something that's inherent to the brand and really important to the world. But we've had to kind of play with that in a variety of ways to make it fit the structure while still respecting that feeling that you get from watching The Walking Dead or reading the comic books.
The one thing I would say, the biggest creative constraint we've probably run into, and I'm sure you guys have seen this too, Henry in particular with The Walking Dead, it's character likenesses. You know, if there's a if it's a movie property or a TV property, a lot of times it's very rare that the actor licenses would be usable by the.
It's cost more, right?
Yeah, it basically is
per
you know,
per person or
yeah.
something like
You-
this.
You basically have to go and do
A separate deal.
a separate licensing deal with each actor like this. The exception there from our perspective is Star Trek, where actually it's one of the rare properties that actually came where you could use all of the actor likenesses from the TV series and the original set of movies. We have everything but the reboot movies, starting with the J.J. Abrams stuff. But you know, again, it's those likenesses you kind of have to work around a little bit, and the IP holders can be a little bit sensitive about, you know, oh, that may look too much like so and so, and you have to kind of redo it.
Yeah.
I would add, you really want to knock down those creative barriers before you do a deal. Like if you're looking at an IP very early in the dialogue, you should be exploring what the limitations are and ensuring that you can make a game that you believe in inside of the IP. And frankly, you should be able to subtract the IP from the game you're making and still know that it's a game that people would be interested in playing. So I think that's kind of almost a prerequisite to getting involved with a larger IP.
What about like the monetization mechanics? Obviously, we're most doing free-to-play games. I mean, again, I think this is something you flushed out before you're signing the deal, but have you guys gotten pushback even in those early discussions where you're like, oh, this is how we monetize the game, and the IP holder is like, well, this isn't sort of in the spirit with the IP, doesn't fit with it. I mean, do you guys have issues with that?
No issues in particular, but when working with Bethesda for Fallout Shelter, they, coming from the console market, they felt that they didn't want to jump into the free-to-play market in the same way as other developers would with all the typical mechanics that we see with timers, things like that. They absolutely did not want that, which is why Fallout Shelter has such a simple and straightforward free-to-play mechanic with the lunch boxes. That's really something that they wanted and that they felt very, very strongly about. So we respected their choice, and it turned out to be the game was a huge success, and the audience of Fallout Shelter or Fallout in general really embraced that model because they were a different type of audience that we're used to seeing on mobile.
Did it make a lot of money, Vince?
It did. It did.
That's good. We haven't gotten anything. Henry, have you gotten any pushback from an IP holder yet?
I was just racking my brain. The only thing I can think of is with Wheel of Fortune on the advertising side, which is getting pretty into the weeds now because they're a TV show and they're running ads and they have specific partners for different initiatives. So there were some carve-outs where I forget exactly what they were, but if they were running the Honda thing, we couldn't do Toyota ads and some things like that. And when you're working with ad networks, it does get semi-complicated because you have to really customize the offerings that they're going to be giving to you, and it takes some scale to be able to work with them in that way. So that's really the only thing we've run into, but it's very specific to that one property.
It's pretty much the only thing we've hit with TV IPs. We've had to run whitelist and blacklist advertising. Children's IPs, we've had to run blacklist to avoid inappropriate things from showing up. But other than that, most licensors don't seem to be interested in the nuances of how you're monetizing the game.
I think a few years ago, before it was just adamantly clear that free-to-play was the dominant business model on mobile, there was a little bit of reticence from some brand holders to take their brand free. I mean, it sounds crazy to say right now, but we definitely saw that, let's say, in 2012, 2013, as we were beginning to talk to some licensors, that some were a little bit more aggressive with their excitement towards the uncapped monetization that free-to-play brings, whereas others felt like it could tarnish the brand in some way. I think that's long gone, in my opinion. I haven't seen it in a few years.
I think people see the revenue opportunity. I think, again, like early on, you might have been talking like someone on the marketing side. All they cared about was, what kind of reach you got. So it's good to hear that is not the case anymore. So wanted to sort of transition to sort of best practices working with the IP holders. Kind of like, how do you feel about this relationship? What kind of sort of relationship should you have with IP holder in terms of different functional areas? How are you guys working with them on a day-to-day, week-to-week, whatever basis? Like, how does that sort of setup work? Any sort of learnings and best practices folks want to share around that?
I mean, we try and foster a relationship at several levels, basically. For instance, we did Duck Dynasty, and approvals went through the network, but you also had talent approvals. And by the second round of likeness approvals, we basically set up a direct relationship with the family. And we're kind of routing comments that way so that we could iterate quickly. And then once they signed off as talent, it kind of reversed the process for getting through the network and agents. The flip side of that is if you want to do something with the logos, you need the brand people on board. So it was really, I think you kind of have to map out the organization that you're dealing with and the IP that you're dealing with and develop a strategy to manage those effectively.
So you interacting like on a weekly basis, even shorter cycle? Or?
When we were doing character approvals and likeness approvals multiple times a day.
Okay.
When we're doing just general production, monthly.
Okay.
Check-ins, really.
Okay. Cool.
We've seen a wide variance in the things that licensors care about, or even the way that they staff, projects on their side, and dealing with different groups at different studios. Wheel of Fortune, we deal directly with the executive producer, but it's through Sony Pictures Television Networks. So there's a large group of people with Walking Dead. It feels almost more mom and pop because you're dealing directly with Skybound, and you can, Hank or I can call Dan Murray, the president, and talk to him in 5 minutes, and then you kind of have your answer right there. So it's very, very different. Some licensors, after the deal's done, they don't even really, they don't say this, but they don't really care that much until like the thing is ready to go, and then they start seeing numbers, and some really care with every step, and they want to feel really involved. So I think it's about getting to know who you're across from on the other side of the table, and what drives them, and what their bosses are asking of them, and all those things, because it's just so different, even from studio to studio within Hollywood.
In our experience, there's a little more scrutiny at the beginning, obviously, because you're trying to, get that relationship going, and the IP owner just needs to figure out that you understand where the hot buttons are. You get it. It's usually there's a lot more back and forth. We're at the point now where with both of our properties with games in the market, with Game of Thrones with HBO and Star Trek Timelines with CBS. It's pretty much they know we've got it, and we push things through, and it's pretty much the rubber stamp process. It's close to a rubber stamp process again. They know we're not going to do stuff color outside the lines.
And you know what, like they say in sports, winning cures everything. Revenue has a way of making it a lot easier to work with Hasbro on Yahtzee or CBS on Star Trek for you guys, I'm sure.
It does.
Yeah.
They're happy.
Yeah, I fully agree that the relationship is different with every licensor that we get. Some of them clearly are more used to it. They've done games before, so they have a process in place. They have staff in place. They'll have producers. They'll have creatives. They'll have artists, even technical people that chime in and take a look at what's going on. Some of them are actually quite new to it, and they don't have much expertise. So they're looking to us to try to help steer production and take them through. So it's really, really different from.
And do you guys do you have like a single point of contact, like your producer that works, or do you actually match like functional areas like art with their art, business, and have multiple sort of?
We keep one person that's consistent throughout, and then if somebody else needs to be involved, we plug them in for that unit. But one person is responsible for all approvals internally. If it's an art approval and we're struggling, for instance, with Power Rangers, we were dealing with a licensor that had never really done 3D before, and they were getting confused by wrinkles and cloth on model approvals. That's a time when you go and get the modeler and bring them in the room and turn them on and let them explain in detail and show on a screen how it will look when it's moving, and then you move them out of the room and go back to a business conversation.
We usually do functional areas.
Okay.
Biz development to biz development, marketing, production, pretty much works.
Okay, cool. So I think one of the things, obviously, all of these IPs, like they usually have like a rabid fan base that knows every single detail about it, you know, potentially more than you guys do. How have you sort of approached that from the sort of design and development process? Do you have people internally usually that are champions of the IP that kind of review stuff? I mean, how do you make sure that you're building something even down to the minute detail that, you know?
You have to have somebody who loves the IP on your team from a production standpoint. I mean, you're walking into just a disaster if you don't at least have one person who lives, breathes, loves the IP that you're working with, and then you sort of use that as an educational point for the rest of the team and a check and balance. But I just personally, for me, from a production standpoint, I don't think you get a good result if you don't have somebody who is one of those rabid fans on your team. And if you don't have them, then you should go recruit one.
Yeah. We talked about, Vincent, I mentioned this, or go ahead.
I was gonna say, for us, it's a little bit different because we're sort of self-selecting in the IPs that we work with. We look at IP that fit, a certain level of criteria. It has to be, it really needs to have a pretty sizable fan base. It's great if it exists in multiple formats, books, TV, movies. Hit one or more of those is actually better. And so we actually approach the brands. Occasionally, brands do, and they have been doing so more lately, obviously, given that we're in the marketplace and have seen success. But we're generally approaching the brands and saying, hey, we think this is an IP that really fits with what we want to do, which is create a game that really appeals to a very large hardcore fan base, and that we can then leverage to create the right kind of game and the right kind of social interaction among the players that will really create a success.
We're similar, actually. The way that I'd visualize it on our end, because our model is a little bit different, the vast majority of our game development is actually done by external partners that we may have invested in, partially own, or just a one-off deal with those guys. So we kind of have like a Venn diagram going on at all times that's sort of floating around. You have developers up here kind of in one area, and we're getting to know them, and hey, these guys are really good at this genre, and these guys really understand these mechanics. And then we've got kind of all these IPs, and we've got guys who are constantly visiting the studios and talking to the IP holders, understanding what's coming, what's interesting, what's on the rise. And then down here is kind of the group that I work with internally, our strategy team, and kind of figuring out what we want to do. And then that middle, that Venn diagram, when all these things are kind of morphing around, you kind of find that moment in time, and you say, hey, Ayugo up in Vancouver, and The Walking Dead, and RPG, like that's what we want to do. And so it's sort of chicken and egg, but like you guys, we are very self-selecting. And one of the advantages, to Jamie's point, that it provides to us is that we can be a little bit more nimble about the types of IPs that we go after. Because we can identify a team who actually loves, an IP that internally we understand and we respect, but may not have the depth of knowledge or passion for. It allows us to really go deep in certain areas and pull from folks around the world. And then, we actually hire against IPs very specifically. So we're spinning up one new IP production internally right now. We've got a general manager and a designer already staffed against it, and we're hiring several other roles, and a prereq for that job is you must love this IP. We'll see how that goes.
Well, for us as developers, we'll sometimes land jobs that are from IP that we actually don't know much of or at all. So of course, if we do have subject matter experts in the studio, then we'll try to bring them in as much as possible, and get their take on the brand and why they love that brand and how they would approach that brand. But if that's not the case, then we of course have to learn about it as much as possible, because we need to understand that when working with IP holders, that for them, that's their job, and they might have had that job for years, and on a day-to-day basis they live and breathe that brand. We come in as new players, and we need to understand that brand as quickly as possible. So it starts off from the very early stages of production, where a few of us really need to do our homework, learn about the brand as much as possible, and eventually start to transmit that brand onto the team. One example is a game that came out recently we did is called Love and Hip Hop, based off the TV show. The main target is African American USA, which is clearly not our the composition of most of our team, and it's not a show that even airs in Canada for the most part. So, what we did was we had viewing sessions every Friday. The team would break off and go and watch an episode, and before we knew it, it actually became gossip in the studio where people were actually talking about it and enjoying the show. So, it's really important that for any project that we do, for any brand that we do, that the team starts to understand and love the brand as much as possible.
Awesome. So I wanted to move on to sort of, build the game, getting ready to release it. So let's talk about sort of the promotional aspect, like maximizing that. What are you guys doing before launch around like building awareness of the game? Any specific strategies or best practices there? And also would love to hear, well, let's start with there. Like, are you guys doing stuff like pre-launch, like in terms of from the consumer perspective, like promote this game coming out? Like what kind of stuff have you guys done? Any best practices you can share on that side? Anyone? No?
Well, I can give, for us, we generally, and I think you guys are a little bit different, Henry, and there's arguments both ways, pro and con. We generally announce a little, prior to launch, but hopefully not too far ahead of launch. We kind of did end up announcing quite a bit ahead for Star Trek. We think for The Walking Dead, March to War, we think that one will be, a lot closer. But we like to start prior to actually the target launch window for the game, just to be able to build up awareness, build up, get a bunch of registered folks, in either on the social media pages or the fan pages, and really start to build the momentum that way. We find it generally helps you sort of get an added, boost at launch, folks you can tap and hopefully, bring things up.
So that's like 3 months out-ish?
Even more.
Okay.
Maybe.
3 to 6 months?
Yeah, 6 months. Maybe.
Okay.
Plus
Cool.
minus, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, there's a healthy debate, I think,
Yeah.
regarding does it make sense to announce, what are the
Right.
benefits? I mean, we actually have and have not. We have not more often than we have, but I'll give you an example that I think it'll end up working out, but we announced a WWE game around some press that was done in our company earlier this year. I believe we might have been like March or April. Well, that game's not going to come out until the beginning of next year. That's not ideal, and if we could do it again, would we have done it differently? Probably. So I think we're still kind of figuring that out. I think there's a giant asterisk that hangs over this question, which is pre-reg and what that does to the industry and what that means. And after 20 million people wake up in however many weeks with Mario on their phone, does that change the game? I think it probably does, actually, significantly, because then you're talking about planting your game at number one, automatically based on the 15 million pre-regs that you just got on day one, if that's how it actually works, and then, seeing the benefits of that. So we do really believe in launch momentum. We take a lot of pride in being able to take big brands to number one when it makes sense to do that. And so if you can do that in a way prior to launch, I mean, we're all over it.
Yeah. Some of it is having a good feel for when launch.
Yes.
And that
Yes.
can always be a tricky thing, right?
Yeah, it's really challenging, especially because, the way that we tend to be operating today is not based on, and again, coming back to that earlier question about dates, we try not to base it around a date.
Right.
We really try to base it around an outcome, and really what I'm talking about are KPIs. And so, if you're not sure when your KPIs are going to get to the level that you can justify the marketing spend that you want to make and can monetize the early players in the way that you recognize they can be monetized, well then it's a tough game to be playing.
Cool. What about soft launch? So how is this, in your guys' experience, different from like a non-branded game? Is there if anything is different? You guys doing anything differently? I mean, I know like for you guys, people find out about the games that you're testing, like Breaking Bad or whatever. I mean, are you doing things differently, or is it pretty much business as usual versus what you would do for a normal game?
It's don't have a perfect solution. If there's a way to do it differently, we'd love to, because it would be nice to not kind of have to pull back the kimono and sort of show what it is. Especially, and we haven't had to do this yet, but especially if we ever have to kill a game, that's going to be a difficult decision to make when you have a rabid fan base who's expecting a game and a brand holder and all those other things. Fortunately, we haven't gotten there yet. But no, for us, it's just business as usual.
Okay.
Oftentimes we put it under a different developer account for a variety of reasons, but other than that, we pretty much you can't test the Breaking Bad game without the Breaking Bad characters.
Yeah.
I know it's common practice to have soft launch, and the reasons are there for why people do it. But there's some cases, for example, Fallout Shelter, there was no soft launch, and they did not want a soft launch even under a different name. They wanted to create a splash when they announced it publicly, so they could get the sheer amount of downloads that they got in one go. Of course, us as a developer, we were, I think stressed is a very, small word, but of course we knew that not having soft launch was a very risky thing, but it was a calculated.
Did you guys do any other like intermediary testing at a larger scale than you would normally, or anything special, or not really? Just
nothing as near as as the amount of downloads that we got. Of course, we did some internal testing. It was very, very closed. It was we had some focus testing going on, but
nothing at scale.
Absolutely not.
That's very scary.
It is.
Yeah.
We're experimenting with running larger closed betas right now. We'll see how it works, but we're running. We have a game coming that our partner doesn't want out and known, and so we're running close to 1,000 people from the community around the IP in a closed beta under NDA, and has the dual purpose back to launch momentum of basically trying to create community ambassadors. And the community engagement team is recruiting out of the beta testers to find.
That's a cool idea.
Yeah.
Do you manage to maintain secrecy around the product itself with that, or can it be publicly broadcasted?
Well, I can't say what it is publicly right now, so no.
We just generally try to soft launch in smaller markets.
Okay.
Stay away from Canada.
Have you guys had IPs like we talk about Love and Hip Hop or something, like where it's not on in Canada? So like, have you had any experience around that, and sort of any best practice around something where an IP doesn't resonate like outside the U.S.? Like, how do you test it? As a soft launch. I mean, I know
we have Wheel of Fortune, our last release a couple weeks ago. I mean, it's a global brand in some ways. Like, there are games that are like Wheel of Fortune that are called different things in other parts of the world, but none have been as long-standing or as big as Wheel of Fortune is. So the only place we could essentially test Wheel of Fortune was either Canada or Australia, like the only places that would make any sense, because it's really a North American brand. So we had it in Australia for a long period of time. I think folks out there didn't realize that it was a test, even though they are used to being tested because it was such a long test period. And it ended up working out all right, I think. We'll see on the long tail.
Okay, cool. All right, so we got 5 more minutes here. So what about launch? So, I mean, the game's ready, full release. How are you guys sort of aligning with any promotional plans for the core medium, if it's the movie, TV show, stuff like this? How are you leveraging basically the brand in its core medium to like promote the game? Any best practice around that? I mean, obviously it depends on the IP, but just curious to get feedback.
I guess we hope that the brand can leverage the game in a way, because we understand that the licensors, they have the muscle to broadcast information far more than we ever could. I'll take Home for example. We had Rihanna tweet about the game, and she had millions and millions of followers. It's free for us.
Was she in the movie?
She's voicing one of the characters.
Okay, cool. I haven't seen it. So.
Yeah, well, now you know. Well, so the fans that she has would, brought an enormous amount of players to us, and that's incredibly valuable. We also got DreamWorks to put up a billboard up in Times Square for a certain amount of time, not for the movie, for the game specifically. So these are things that thanks to them at DreamWorks, we actually managed to do. So I think depending on who you work with, they can actually help you bring the game up, as something that exists in their ecosystem that they're trying to, bring up. And
It's actually one of the more challenging points for us as a smaller studio in managing IP relationships, because oftentimes we do a lot of work with History Channel, A&E, and ad sales is separate from licensing, and ad sales has their own ROI, and ad sales doesn't want to give you anything that you're not paying for, versus the licensing folks who are trying to support the brand. We make it a part of the negotiation. For the TV brands we do, we really like to see 15-second spots rolling in and rolling out of the show. I can say our data shows that that's really the best marketing that we've gotten when we run ads on the same network, 30-second spots. We don't see anywhere near the same uptick that we do doing a 15-second intro, outro to a particular episode. And so at least from the TV stuff, from a marketing standpoint, we've really tried to focus on that. We're doing some personality-based stuff next year, and we pre-negotiated all of our social media commitments as minimums. Those are built into the contract. Everybody understands what needs to happen at launch and for how long. But it's kind of by IP, by licensor, and figure out the best way through the maze.
Obviously we work with very big properties, so our game launches are multi. We use the full marketing mix in terms of trying to create awareness. Those mobile game launch, as Henry well knows, can be multi-million-dollar efforts. So you really want to try to have that well coordinated. As Jamie was saying, you want to have the good relationship with the IP holders so that they can help you, they can piggyback. They usually have some ability to contact their fan base, and you leverage that as much as you can. You basically just use everything at your disposal to try and generate that awareness.
But it sounds like basically it's key to basically quantify those things in your agreement, because if you assume, you might end up with nothing potentially in terms of like promotion.
They're usually pretty open to doing that, depending on look, it could depend on the holder, right? But generally, they're pretty. If they know what they have, capabilities they have at their disposal, and they'll pretty much they're fine with signing up for that stuff that they can control.
Yeah. The other thing that I'll mention about launching a game, and this is very core to the way that we do things at Scopely, we look at IP as kind of a force multiplier on the marketing that we would already be doing. So I think a lot of sort of folks who are maybe new to the world of IP think, oh, okay, wow, I just spent some money on an MG, like that's where my marketing budget went. And to a large extent, that can be okay, but it's not nearly as good as what you see when you market alongside an IP. CPIs will go down, the amount of users will, the kind of the halo around it will increase. Just awareness for the overall brand and game just goes up and up and up the more you do. So I think it's tempting to say, wow, I just dropped all this money on the IP, like that, it's going to market itself because people search every day for Star Trek. But if you can actually start to seed the marketing in a very smart way, you'd be amazed by the amount that you might not have to spend to get the results that you would like to see.
Awesome. We could talk about this for a long time, but unfortunately we're out of time. Do we have time for questions? No? Okay, sorry, no time for questions. Awesome. Thank you so much, you guys. This is awesome, and we'll move forward.